welcome. I'm Ijoma Honyato. Tonight, National Human Rights Commission indicts 118 persons, including some former governors, for violence and electoral malpractices during the 2007 and 2011 general elections. President Buhari admits Nigeria's dire economic situation, insists his administration's commitment to transparency is yielding desired results. Federal government confirms foreign portfolio investment and foreign direct investments into Nigeria's economy crashed by 86% and 56% respectively. And United Nations investigates evidence of toxic gas attack on rebel-held area of the Syrian city of Aleppo. On Business News tonight, House Committee on Banking and Currency seek a safer monetary system for Nigeria's financial markets.
And on sports news, Nigeria's Jonathan Akiemi admits caving under pressure cost him the semi-final of the men's kayak singles event at Rio 2016.
Gloria Umezoke, and from Abuja, federal government dispatches an emergency team to check the spread of polio in 2 local government areas of Borno State.
The National Human Rights Commission, the NHRC, has indicted 118 people for election malpractices during the 2007 and 2011 general elections. Some of those indicted by the Commission include a former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Maurice Iwu, a former governor of Delta State, Dr. Emmanuel Uduaghan, a former governor of Edo State, Professor Osunbor, and the former acting governor of Kogi State, Clarence Obafemi. The NHRC, in its report released today, also indicted the People's Democratic Party's governorship candidate in the 2015 election in Benue State, Mr. Teheme Tazo, among other individuals, government institutions and security agencies as contributors to allegations of widespread electoral fraud. The Executive Secretary of the Commission, Professor Ben Angwe, says those indicted will be further investigated and charged to court.
In a bid to curb cases of electoral violence and malpractices, the National Human Rights Commission has published the names of Nigerians who have been indicted by tribunals and law courts across the country for various forms of electoral malpractices. These persons include a former governor of Delta State, Dr. Emmanuel Uduaghan, former governor of Edo State, Professor Osunbor, a former acting governor of Kogi State, Clarence Obafemi, a former lawmaker from Ekiti State, Senator Ayo Arise, and a former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Maurice Iwu. Others indicted by the report include the Independent National Electoral Commission and its officials in Anambra, Ebonyi, Delta, Katsina, Kogi and Rivers States, the Appeal Court, election petition tribunals, and political parties such as the People's Democratic Party, the defunct All Nigerian People's Party, and the Action Congress of Nigeria. The Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission says those indicted should be prosecuted to serve as a deterrent to others.
This report altogether contained 118 indictments. We are going to make that list public, and we are also going to forward the list of persons to be prosecuted to the Attorney General of the Federation. And there are also some persons from institutions that have been indicted for committing administrative misconducts.
The chairman of the Technical Working Committee, which carried out the review of the elections, gives a breakdown of those indicted by the various electoral tribunals across the country.
Criminal/administrative indictments were 49 in number. Administrative indictments were 38 in number. Then administrative/judicial indictments were 4. Provisional indictments, even lawyers, we found that lawyers were also susceptible to some electoral misconduct or violations of electoral law, and there were 3 in number. And also judicial indictments were 7 in number.
A national commissioner in the Independent National Electoral Commission advocates an electoral offences court as a solution to the menace.
So this comes to the fore what we've been saying for a very, very long time, and which we believe is due and overdue, is the issue of this election offences tribunal. It's been about 5 different bodies, including the Ways panel, have made this recommendation.
Nigerians are waiting to see what the government will make of this report by the National Human Rights Commission and its recommendations. Amaka Okafor, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the former governor of Delta State, Dr. Emmanuel Uduaghan, has reacted to the NHRC report. According to him, the NHRC did not properly study the judgment of the Apex Court in Benin, which exonerated him of the allegations. Mr. Uduaghan also expressed concern that the Commission did not invite him during its investigations before making its report public.
What the National Human Rights Commission did is unfortunate. Unfortunate in the sense that they probably did not study that case very well. I had 19 tribunal cases throughout my 8 years tenure, and it was really that case that had problems. Now, it was a case I had won at the lower tribunal, and it went to the appeal court in Benin. And the appeal court in Benin had decided against me based on the issue of the burden of proof. Now, they said, as the respondent, that I was supposed to, as the respondent, be the person to deal with the burden of proof. But in law, it is when you allege, then you have to prove your allegation. You that is a petitioner, you are the one that's to prove your allegation. But the appeal court said I was the one, I responded to prove the allegation. That was what happened. And unfortunately, I could not go to Supreme Court because at that time, the governorship election tribunal stopped at the appeal court. Fortunately, in the 2011 election, there was a case between CPC and INEC, which was decided by the Supreme Court. CPC also wanted to use that tactics, but the Supreme Court said no, that if you are alleging, then you have to prove. You know, I think the Supreme Court has stressed that case. And I thought the National Human Rights Commission should have actually studied my case. The report, the judgment which they based their report on, they did not study the case. If they had studied, they would not recommend it for prosecution, because it was not a correct judgment. It was a judgment that was turned upside down.
Foreign direct investment coming into the Nigerian economy through the capital market has declined by 85.5% since the first quarter of 2015, and that's according to the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. He spoke at the Presidential Policy Dialogue organized by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The Vice President explained that the FDI, which averaged $621 million in the first quarter of 2015, declined to $90.3 million within the first quarter of 2016.
It's widely accepted that the private sector is the engine room of the economy, and that's the motive behind this policy dialogue, which brings captains of industry to interact with the nation's policymakers and, more importantly, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. Attention is focused on the economic recession, the ease of doing business, and the policy somersault.
The short-term outlook of the key economic indicators is not very bright. As we all know, the major trigger of the economic downturn was the collapse of oil price. This time calls for adjustment.
Today's policy dialogue session comes at a time our nation is going through economic contractions with very palpable consequences.
With these concerns raised, the Vice President's reaction is next, and he begins by providing the backgrounds to the current state of the economy.
The immediate problem we encountered was a sharp decline in oil prices and production, and the lack of savings to cushion the impact.
While appealing to the industrialists and the scarcity of foreign exchange, he says his immediate task is to achieve an inclusive economy through frequent engagement with the private sector.
While the President has approved the establishment of the Presidential Council on the Ease of Doing Business. And that Presidential Council has already started to meet. We intend in the next couple of weeks to release a broad set of guidelines on what steps will be taken and what steps will be, and how quickly those steps will be implemented.
His speech is followed by more concerns raised from business leaders.
There are factories whose raw materials are among the 41 items who are in the process of closing down. I want to announce here that at least 50 of our members have closed shop.
At the moment, what we're looking at is how some of these policies can actually transfer to the fiscal side as opposed to the way in which the monetary authorities have tended to handle it.
On South Africa's gross domestic product overtaking Nigeria's GDP, the vice president appears less bothered.
For me, I think my concern, and I believe the concern of government, is to ensure that we have an economy that is strong, vibrant, and able to provide jobs and opportunities for the people.
Government structural reforms and fiscal policies often change, but the economy remains tied to the feedback effects of other global headwinds. As the real economy continues to bear the brunt of these effects, the business leaders can only wait and see when the tide will turn. Temple Ashaju, Channels Television News.
And despite the severe shortage of resources, commitment to transparency and accountability is serving the government in good stead. President Muhammadu Buhari made the comments today while hosting the Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, Professor Babatunde Oshotimehin. According to him, quote, "It's been a very difficult year for Nigeria. Before we came to office, petroleum sold for about $100 per barrel. Then it crashed to $37 and now hovers between $40 and $45 per barrel. Suddenly we're a poor country, but commitment to transparency and accountability is not making people know that there is severe shortage," end of quote. Nevertheless, he gave an assurance that the country's exploding population and cultural practices makes Nigeria a fertile ground for research. Professor Oshotimehin, a former Minister of Health in Nigeria, said the UNFPA is determined to promote healthcare facilities across the country to address women and children's needs primarily. In the meantime, the President has urged rich countries to do something urgent to save the Lake Chad from extinction arising from the effects of climate change. President Muhammadu Buhari made this appeal while receiving the Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Irina Bokovia, in his office. The President warned that the failure to regenerate the Lake Chad will lead to another round of migration by the people living in the areas. He added that Nigeria and the other countries of the Lake Chad Basin lacked the billions of dollars required to channel water from the Congo Basin into the lake to check its rapid depletion. In part two, after the break, more on the state of the economy and policy. I'll be joined by the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. That's in a moment. Join us again.